sleep. So, but we'll get started here. All right, so gonna talk through the agenda. So, what is Self-Source Security Office Hours? I know I say this every single week, and just try, want to make sure, especially for the new people, they know why I started this and why I think it's important. And we're still seeing many, many data breaches coming out. There's new slides on my logo, my slide of shame, I think we may be calling it soon. But the really key is there's all these data breaches happening recently in the Salesforce ecosystem. They're increasing, not declining, and too many organizations and people are losing sensitive data, including myself in some of the breaches. So really wanted to create some sessions with get people in front of experts that can help you understand what you should be looking at and doing right now to protect your data in Salesforce, and also provide a forum so you can have a place to ask every couple of weeks questions to experts as well. So because a lot of people don't have resources on you don't have a large SI with experts that you can talk to every week. So this is why we've done this, to create this forum for everyone to have an ability to be able to ask the important questions to ensure their data and their customers' data are protected in Salesforce. All right, next. So the rules of engagement are very simple. Be respectful to others on the call. Everyone has been allowed to talk. Just don't interrupt people. If you have questions, either ask it in the QA or wait till until we're done presenting, and then you can ask the questions. If you ask questions in the Q&A and we see something relevant, we will stop the presentation. We can have a quick sidebar and then continue. The most important thing I always say every time is take notes and walk away with something actionable you can implement today, because that's why we're doing this. It's not just for you to watch, it's for you to do and make sure that you are making positive changes in your organization. All right. So who am I? I am Matt Meyers. I am the CEO and founder of EzProtect. And I have more than 18 years experience in the sales ecosystem. I'm a certified technical architect and Amazon bestseller of my book, Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences. Another reason I do this is because I actually was involved in a real data breach. And that's my book is about what I learned from it and helping other people also learn from it so that doesn't happen to you. So we'll go ahead and continue on with Zach here if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi y'all. My name's Zach. I'm a current Salesforce MVP. I think this is my fourth year in the MVP program. It's becoming a bit of a blur. 12 times certified. Eventually, I'll finish out my systems architect. I just need identity. Been working in the Salesforce space for over 10 years. I've been a consultant. I primarily work in-house on the customer side. I am currently a director of architecture at Link Logistics, but I've worked at or consulted for PayPal, T-Mobile, Change Healthcare, United Healthcare, NetApp, and like various other companies. Current co-lead of the Boston Salesforce Architect User Group. I have done a lot in the Salesforce community. I probably should update my site with everything at some point. Former Austin, Texas admin group leader. I've spoken at plenty of Salesforce conferences, and I recently relaunched my newsletter, the CRMT, where I've been focusing a lot on security, just because I feel there isn't a lot of knowledge on the level of effort or the detail that teams need to go into. And I've been working with security teams for many years at this point. So I wanted to give out my knowledge without just doing it on a website like a Twitter or a LinkedIn. And I've also been involved in a data breach very early in my career. It was 2014, 2015, back when I was actually doing tech support for a company called Carbonite. They got bought by OpenText at some point. And I had to get trained by lawyers and security teams because I was working the phone lines for the people that had their data breached on the business and personal side. So that was a big eye opener very early in my career. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that you hope never happens to you, but then, when it does, it's very much an eye-opening experience and very terrifying experience. And that's why the way I wrote my book was more of a personal first-person account. And I think you might have read it. And I think that's my point is how people experience what it's like, not just tell them about it. And I think to make it real. So, but anyway. Continuing on, so so EzProtect Office Hours is supported by EzProtect. As I said, I am the founder and CEO of EzProtect. One thing I found interesting lately is I've just been keeping an eye on more, security things lately because of all these phishing attacks and all these different organizations. And I've been noticing every day I get about 2 to 3 phishing attacks in my email. And we actually have an email gateway that we use that's scanning all of our emails coming in for viruses, phishing links. And then, of course, just like everyone else, we have email to case that brings that into Salesforce. And so what's interesting, even with all that protection in place, I'm still getting around 2 to 3 phishing attacks every single day in my email. I mean, I look in my quarantine and it's blocking a lot of them, but still some get through and then those get into Salesforce. So the question I'm actually asking people lately is, how many phishing URLs do you have in your Salesforce right now? And because these systems are not infallible, and it's about having multiple walls, multiple layers of protection, and that's really what EzProtect is doing. Is we're helping, protect our customers from those malicious URLs, malicious files coming into Salesforce. But anyway, interesting little side story there. But always like to do a recap from last week's office hours. So last week we had Paul McCollum on talking about how to get executives to actually care about Salesforce security. And I think it's more of a catchy title, but I think really it's about the awareness. A lot of them don't have that awareness, or they have the blinders on because of the shared security in Salesforce. So we were really talking about what are some things that they should be aware of or thinking about, so that they can be more Salesforce security aware, and then being able to create those policies and directives down the chain so people are doing what they need to do to keep the data safe. So things that people don't think about are sandboxes, for example. Your sandboxes, especially your full copies, have production data, and you really should be thinking of them just like a production system. And often there are weak controls. You have people that don't get disabled in there. And then another one would be thinking about AI security and AI, like especially Agentforce. That's actually the talk I gave at Dreamforce, was how to secure your Agentforce in a COE, or what's the process in a COE to keep your agents secure. And some things people aren't thinking about is like AI injection. They're thinking about the data that leaves into the agentic platforms, but not really thinking about the prompts. And so really quick, just talk about something I saw over in a show over in London last year. Was someone showed an agent that said, it gave it an instruction, don't tell what the password is. But then, so he tested. So what's the password? Sorry, I'm not allowed to tell you that. But then it said, what are you thinking about right now? And then it gave the password. So that's where you need to be really careful of that kind of stuff. And that's one thing that we're talking about in that last session. Also, we see a lot of security, and this is maybe something Zach, you might talk about today. Most security teams are doing general compliance checklists, and just asking all the wrong questions for Salesforce. And that's where you need to educate those security teams about what are the right questions to ask. And then, other things like running internal bug bounties, fire drills, and checking to see, getting employees to help raise issues and awareness internally, not just externally. But if you want to learn more see that more about that session, there's your QR code so you can get into that. We also like to do a hot off the press every week. So IBM every year releases the state of Salesforce for each year. And so there's some interesting metrics you can see on the screen here. First was only 25% of people were confident that they have the right governance for their agentic AIs. A lot of the major security risks they're concerned about is corrupted data in the agent memory, which actually unchecked privileges for agents, not prompts, which is interesting, but that's something that you raise awareness with. 50%, 7% though are increasing investment in security and compliance monitoring for AI adoption. Although I have seen some of these compliance things they're sending across these agreements, they're very vanilla. They're not really asking the right questions again. And 50% haven't issued comprehensive AI usage. So some things it's a Wild West, or sometimes they're doing the complete one side of the spectrum, which they're just saying no AI at all. Others are just not really saying anything, and then people are going in and then turning things on and creating gaps in the system. And then only 9% are considering risk as a top factor in valuing AI tools. So I think this is where a lot of that governance needs to come in, like what we were talking about at Dreamforce. So All right, so here's my favorite slide, or not so favorite slide. This is not the logos of all of our companies we have. This is the logos of all the companies, at least the big ones that have been breached in the recent breaches. And we added some new ones this week. We've got UPS on there, Saks looks like, Albertsons. There's all, it's amazing that a lot of these keep popping up every week. And so it's like this is why we're doing this. So this list does not keep growing, which it has been. I think in a couple of weeks I might have to have a second slide for this, which is very unfortunate. So again, this is why we're doing this. So don't get your company on this slide. All right, so I this is always do these same metrics every week because I think these are very important. This is some stuff we've got some IBM and others. Well, the really scary thing is 204 days in the average time to detect a breach, and I believe it's another 70 or so days to stop the breach. And so it's around 276 days from detecting to stopping a breach. So what could someone be doing in your system for that amount of time? How much damage they could be doing? And this is all about this is a very scary metric to me, why this is so large. And 74% are human elements. Your people are your weakest factor. And that's why you need to ensure that your people don't have the access, only the access they need to do their jobs. You're not, you're training everyone, ensuring that everyone is, not, that weakest link, or if they are, you can at least ensure you can contain those breaches as fast as possible. Yeah, so you can see already here, so many companies have been affected, 760 in these breaches, 1.5 billion records exposed so far. So this problem is growing and growing, and something needs to be done to stop this. So, and that's what Zach might be helping us with a little bit. Yeah, this is another good one. 60% of professionals say the role is more stressful now, with 45% saying budgets are being too low to hire people for security, for to allowing well-trained people to be in your organization. Another thing I keep harping about is that people are not investing in security roles in their organization. They're just hiring people offshore for their admin teams, or people that they're not having a security architect who actually understand the risks. And so this is something that why we keep trying to socialize this. Anyway, got through all that. So Zach, if you can go and take the floor now, and I'll advance the slides as you need on how can IT security teams build sole source domain expertise without burning out.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Let's go to the first slide.
Oh,
And there we go. Perfect. I wanted to have a little bit of fun before we got really started with a lot of the technical material with a story about Elle Woods. Now, if y'all don't know who Elle Woods is, she's the main character in a movie called Legally Blonde. Not going to spoil it for you. Go watch the movie after this session right away if you haven't already watched it. But I want to frame the conversation around security professionals. At least in my experience, they often start working with Salesforce teams and they feel like outsiders. Salesforce is a highly specialized system. It has a layered security model involving expertise where you need to know about profiles, permission sets, organization-wide defaults, how to lock down the authorization model of the org, let alone the org as an entire home or as a whole. And that differs from traditional network or application security. So when security teams are often working by themselves, they often feel like they have to rapidly apply their studies and they have to master platform specific concepts like Apex or sharing rules or permission sets or even the Salesforce Shield suite, which is an entire beast in its own. What I'd recommend biggest for security teams on one, they can't secure the entire Salesforce platforms by themselves, and it's important that they set themselves up as partners or peers to their Salesforce developers and administrators who often view security as in an opportunity that has improvement. It's not uncommon for Salesforce teams to think security will slow down their projects or risk their deliverable dates. To succeed, the security team must really earn the respect of different Salesforce members that they work with at their company, or even the partners that these companies work with, and they have to become true partners and not just a unique security perspective just to say no, but really enable business processes safely. Now, again, why do I have Elwoods here? Well, Security teams have to prove their worth by finding solutions that are both secure and practical and converting friction into collaboration and demonstrating that their involvement ultimately leads to a stronger and more secure platform. In the Elle Woods narrative, the biggest hurdle wasn't the concepts. It wasn't law. She got a 4.0 in college. She went to a really prestigious law school. But what was the obstacle that she had to overcome was the snobbery and the low expectations of her peers. And if you don't have that relationship built between your Salesforce team and security teams, it doesn't matter how good you are at security. It doesn't matter how good you are at Salesforce. You are not going to get anywhere and you're not going to be viewed as a true partner. So I'd really recommend focusing on those relationships and establishing processes and governance frameworks that work for both teams and not just one team. We can go to the next
Yep.
slide.
Yep. And I did want to add one other quick thing, or maybe have a quick sidebar for that. So, and I think, so I took communication classes on my MBA, and one of the things my professor said was you need to take 100% responsibility that you are understood by the other person, and the other person, and you take 100% responsibility the other person understands you. And I think to take that the next level is that, like we were talking about, snobbery thing. And I think this exists on both sides of the fence too. You get a lot of the security people coming in saying, okay, I've been doing this forever. I know exactly what I need to be doing. These are the questions that need to be answered to make things secure. And then you have the Salesforce people saying, well, this is Salesforce. You know nothing about this. So, why, why do I need to even listen to you? You're asking some things that are even not relevant. So instead of, getting that battle between people, and so as soon as you start talking negatively towards somebody or talking down to somebody, they shut down. And that's kind of where, with your security teams, you need to be, like you're saying, Zach, open that door, give them the olive leaf, bring them in, show them that you understand them, you understand what they're trying to do, and you appreciate what they're doing, but you're trying to help enable them to do their job better. And then same thing with you. You need to open the door for them and hear what they're saying. And you can learn a lot from these security frameworks and these people that have been doing this a long time. So I think that's kind of what the key is, right?
Yep, exactly. A true partnership on both sides.
Yep.
Awesome. So why your security team can't secure Salesforce alone? We'll start talking about some of the technical details now, and I'll talk about a framework a little bit later on. But this is really going to be your crucial starting point. Unlike a traditional perimeter defense that you could implement on your InfoSec team or procedures, Salesforce is in a multi-tenant cloud environment. Security isn't just a firewall. It's a very specific identity and data-centric model in which you have layered vertical and horizontal permissions for org, object, field, and even record level access. And to understand how you secure the code base and how that interacts with user level access or record level access, that requires a specific expertise, which security teams could skill up on if they would like, or if they have that partnership with Salesforce developers. A majority of Salesforce developers I have worked with knows exactly the difference between with sharing or without sharing, for instance, in their Apex class. And oftentimes, developers, when there isn't a static analysis security testing tool or something else to put a governance or a framework in place, 9 times out of 10, they are going to do without sharing and just ignore all least-based access control principles. If you have a great relationship with your Salesforce team, you can work together to identify those common vulnerabilities or exceptions and put in procedures in place in your developer operations to prevent such specific vulnerabilities. But again, it really requires having that Salesforce expertise to understand that. The language also introduced specific vulnerabilities that you may already be familiar with. SQL injection, they call it SOQL injection in Salesforce. Happens all the time when you don't escape your SOQL queries inside of your Apex classes. So having a static analysis security testing tool to check for an unsecured SOQL query is a great way that security teams and engineering teams for Salesforce can partner on making sure they have an agreed upon framework for how code can look, for instance. You can't just apply your old InfoSec rule set. It really, again, needs to be that partnership of having that engagement with your Salesforce team to figure out what works best for both teams to get to an aligned framework. Speaking about community and experience cloud, that's entirely different. Well, not entirely different, but instead of sharing rules, it uses sharing sets, groups, and different ways to grant shares for users. When you start talking about work orders or certain objects that are tied to accounts, shares the same sharing as accounts. So then you have to get very similar, or you have to get very creative with how you can get the shares provision to your external users. And this is where I also see a lot of developers will then just default to, I'm just going to give this without sharing. So I don't have to figure out how do I get this like work order shared to this specific user at this specific account. And this can create massive access holes for partners or customers and create vulnerabilities. So if you have a community cloud or experience cloud instance, your complexity just went way up. Um, Salesforce likes to position a joint responsibility model. Salesforce will secure, their platform infrastructure, but it's up to the companies to secure everything inside the instance. So that really puts the risk on the company for when there's an operational procedure that opens up an operational risk, such as a flow running and deleting a bunch of data or leaving Apex classes open without sharing, leaving, I've been at places where you could just Google everything on an Experience Cloud instance because the guest user profile has way too much access and everything's just out there in the open, including customer cases or financial data or other stuff. So take serious the joint responsibility model, but we go to the next slide.
I was going to say, I hear there's a great book out there on how to secure your digital
Yes.
experiences and some of this. And actually, the story that I wrote was actually about cases that got exposed from a digital experience because they weren't properly secured. So it was kind of interesting. One other thing I did want to touch on too, which was from that Secure the Force challenge I did back on the developers. And I'm not sure if we're going to cover this later, but Salesforce developers, they, like you said, they understand without sharing, with sharing. Sometimes, they are thinking about the permissions, the profiles, security, all that. But then I think where they start dropping off is when it gets closer and closer to the other side of the house, the security side of the house. And so you think about like there were questions where you had to fix cross-site scripting attacks, cross-site forgery, all those kinds of things. And I think if you ask the normal developer to explain what those are, they probably couldn't really tell you. And I think that's the other part that you really should be thinking about for your own team is educating them or talking to the security team to give some maybe lunch and learns about some of those more advanced attacks, and then truly understanding how that applies to Salesforce and what you need to be doing in your code to fix it. Because those scanning tools won't always catch all that stuff as well, because sometimes it's context driven or other things. And so those are things that I wanted to call out that I even really didn't really think about that deep until I took this challenge. And now I'm very much myself thinking about those more advanced topics as well from Apex development. So
Yeah, we should drop a link in the chat to that book if people aren't familiar with it. I heard someone wrote it on this call.
yeah, someone did. I think it was
Awesome.
Cody.
Yes, it was Cody all along. So why do IT and Salesforce teams struggle to collaborate? We could talk about this for a while. This slide is not going to do its justice, but what I wanted to focus on is the velocity of change, not just the velocity of change from Salesforce itself, but also internal organizational velocity. So, as Salesforce professionals know, there's three major releases a year for core: spring, summer, winter, plus patches and continuous development in your org that you have little to no control over. This means security configuration, best practices, potential risks are always in motion. Example, November 4th, API access control is changing for all customers of Salesforce because Salesforce is removing that God mode permission of where anyone can access any API when they have one system permission. Stuff like that, that wasn't planned to be in the winter release. I'm sure it has something to do with some of the recent incidents that occurs in the world right now. But that's an example of Salesforce is always enforcing changes, and that's one angle of change velocity that introduces a complexity for not just Salesforce teams, but also security teams to stay up to date with what changes are occurring. I see you
Yeah.
might have something to
I
say,
was,
Matt.
yeah, I said one thing also I think was interesting. I heard on one of our previous calls, which I think is just as impacting, if not more, than what you were just talking about with changes they're bringing. I heard that the SOAP API soon won't be supporting login with username and password, and so that means you'll have to be using session access to log into the SOAP API. And all these companies that for the years have been still using SOAP API, that's a lot of changes that's going to happen. And so this is stuff that they give you some time, but eventually you need to make that change. And like you're saying, that's the stuff that you have to just roll with the punches on, right?
Yep, and yes, SOAP API, I've heard that the username password is being shut off. I'd also recommend people go a step further and shut off username password login for their internal users, even their external users, if they have the budget and bandwidth to do an external SSO, and only set up a couple of break glass accounts to log into the org. That'll greatly reduce the attack vector for, you know, whenever somebody's password gets breached in a personal password breach, because we know no one's repeating their work passwords with their personal passwords in their life.
Never. Yeah,
Never.
I think I mean I'm that's one of my soapboxes too. It's like I wish you just completely get rid of username and passwords everywhere. But I mean I've done some research on this, and it's pretty impossible right now with across all your systems. But there are stuff that you can do to limit that, at least, like you're saying. And I think that the more you can, the better, because just about all these breaches are because people got people's passwords. And I mean, at the very least, have multi-factor IP security, but there's always some way around some of these things. So the better, more and more you can get closer to passwordless login, I think the better.
Yes, exactly. And what I have here is limited InfoSec access to the security settings of Salesforce. This presents a struggle. It's a needed struggle. They're intentionally often decoupled from the Salesforce administration team. You don't want to have too great of a concentration of power in one specific IT group in which they control all of the systems. So very necessary for governments, but it also means they don't have eyes on the ground. So let alone they don't necessarily always have knowledge of the system. They don't even have access to the system where they can go and check and validate something themselves. So when they have to trust and verify, they're often trusting the partnership with the Salesforce team that they work with, and they're having to rely on reports or alerts from proactive monitoring tools like a Datadog or Rapid7 or what have you, Einstein Analytics, event monitoring, or they're having to trust reports from specific team members um, coming to them. And this presents a crucial highlight on they can be as proactive as they want, but if they don't have that trusted partnership with their Salesforce team, that's really going to impact how successful not only the Salesforce team is, but also the InfoSec team on securing the org. So I really want to hammer home on the trust aspect, but also in terms of organizational velocity, I'd spoken about how, Salesforce releases 3 times a year for core. There's a monthly release of Data Cloud, and all these niche products from Salesforce have different release schedules, but internal release processes could be even faster than this. It's not uncommon for, teams that don't have a DevOps process where they might be building in prod, not recommended. Or they could be releasing every other day, or they could be releasing every week, or every other week, or maybe monthly or quarterly, depending on the project size. And that introduces another level of complexity where security has to be agile and continuously working with these teammates to understand not only what Salesforce is putting in, but what the heck is the Salesforce team at the company putting into production.
Correct.
We can go to the next slide. Okay, so how can security teams build trust through education and shared frameworks? So you've heard me say profiles, permission sets, Apex, like very Salesforce specific language. Security teams are going to be speaking in like network segmentation or common vulnerabilities and exceptions and the risk registrar and attack vectors. That language does not overlap with your Salesforce admin, proverbially out of the box. They do not walk into a Salesforce team knowing what any of that is unless they had a short stint as a cybersecurity analyst or they've done some research on their own. How you phrase conversations when there isn't that mutual understanding of a framework is focus your discussions on common language. An example of common language for risk is data exposure, talking about how if you create a wide open sharing set or a sharing rule will mean this customer PII is exposed to all external users, if they know how to get there. That will create red flags for not only the Salesforce team, but also business stakeholders. 9 times out of 10, if you go and tell a C-suite member, I'm going to put everything on Google because we're not locking it down in the sharing rule and profile of perm sets, they are not going to let that project proceed until that vulnerability is patched up. So really focusing on the impact of a setting or a feature that is being built goes a lot farther than using buzzwords about the tool's name. And one framework that I really specifically like, I'm going to talk about a Salesforce framework, and then I'm going to talk about, zero trust framework from security teams. If you have signature success as a customer of Salesforce, I know that's the top line item, nor am I getting a commission on talking about signature success. You can actually do once a year a very detailed security engagement with Salesforce where they bring in a security professional from their InfoSec team and they have this framework that measures your application security, your session security. There's 5 levels where I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but they crawl your org, they crawl your operations, they crawl your processes, and they benchmark you on a scale of 1 to 5 across each category on where your org and your company stands as it relates to the entire Salesforce customer base. This is really valuable for executives because they're often looking for a number to baseline. Like, how secure is our company using Salesforce? How secure is our processes? So having Salesforce along further line saying, this is where your application security is. This is your behavioral processes. Here's your session level security is really valuable, and getting in a number of 1 to 5 can really help highlight different areas for your executive team and then can lead into funding for, oh, I saw this was at a 1. I would really like this to get to a 3. Well, here's the gaps on what we need to do to get behavioral security to a 3. We need to reduce the amount of people that have sysadmin. We need to reduce people that have modify all data. Having such a framework from Salesforce, super valuable to have. You want to say something, Matt?
Yeah, I was going to say, but there is some bad news too to all of this, right?
Yep.
No matter what you do, you will get breached someday. And I think that's just an inevitability. It's just a matter of to what extent it is. And that's where it goes back to like some of the stuff that you were talking about already, like monitoring, ensuring that you have that monitoring in place, ensure you've done everything you can do, making sure that you are able to quickly act when a breach happens to contain those breaches a lot better. And another is talking frameworks. Another framework that been really on. I think we talked about this a lot as well, a little bit, was the NIST framework, the threat response life cycle, which is centered more around what you do when you actually have a breach or an incident versus actually protecting against it. I think one phase is the protecting against it, but all the other phases are how you can quickly handle it, right? And I think you need both.
Yep, having an incident response plan is critical. It's not if, but when. I totally agree with you there. When you apply like a Swiss cheese type of method where you keep adding different controls and processes, that'll greatly reduce your risk exposure. It's not going to ever make it zero. There's always going to be some type of incident, whether it's a full-blown all of your data got leaked, or it's somebody logged into the system that they shouldn't have, or something else. It's not a matter of if, but when, and having an incident response plan would be really critical on, okay, an admin on your team noticed an unauthorized access to an endpoint. What do they do? A lot of times, it's not uncommon for an admin to do nothing because
Yep.
they're either afraid or they don't have the psychological safety to report it or they don't know how to report it or their
Hmm.
manager says it's not a priority. So having a documented procedure for when an incident occurs is very critical.
Yep. And the monitoring so you can actually detect those incidents as fast as possible. And I think that's part of what we've seen in a lot of these breaches lately is the detection and the monitoring was not there. So they didn't know people were in their systems. there's one company I talk about every week, but I'm not going to mention it this week, but is that there was someone in their system for a year slowly siphoning data off. How do you not know someone's in your house for an entire year walking around, right? Talking,
Yep.
opening doors and taking stuff out. And finally, about almost a year later, they realize, hey, something's going on here. And so that's kind of, I think, part of that is of course, the acting, but also the monitoring, ensuring that you know what's going on in your house before it's someone, steals everything.
Yes, exactly. Now, one framework that comes from traditional security teams that I really like to train my Salesforce teams on is the zero trust framework. So oftentimes, security will say, no, you can't do that. And we all know how human beings are. They're going to find a loophole. They are going to find a way. A developer is going to get very creative on, well, they said I couldn't do this, but they didn't say I couldn't go into this door when they know it's going to be a red flag either way. So what I like to train my Salesforce teams are is assume from the start no user, system, or network inside or outside the org is inherently trusted. I follow a least-based access control for users that even need to work in the org. You do not get access to a record unless you have a valid business reason to create that record, to update that record, to see that column on that record. Being able to log in as users, even on a portal instance, that needs to be heavily justified on why somebody needs a permission. It needs to be documented, whether it's in Jira, Confluence, SharePoint, wherever you want to document or establish a process. Set that expectation with your Salesforce team that's delivering of a zero trust framework will help define rules that holds not only production accountable, but across your different environments that you're building in and sets different behaviors and procedures for your Salesforce team to operate in. And security teams often really appreciate that because they know inherently nothing is trusted. And it does, I'm going to be frank, it does add cycle time. You can't just do it without sharing and then know everything's going to work because you're running at the system level rather than the user level. But it's a lot better than when, your company does get breached and there was a decision point you had in a project where you could have said this is going to take 3 weeks to build instead of 1 week to build just because you didn't consider security from the get-go of requirements.
Yep.
Okay, next slide. So what can you do starting today? There's so many different topics that I could talk about, and this could be much longer than an hour. But the first thing I wanted to say is invest in Salesforce security domain expertise for your teams. It's going to sound very cliche. I know. Utilize Trailhead. There is a lot of great content on Trailhead. You should be considering different Salesforce certifications or books, such as Securing Your Digital Experiences. There's many other books as well talking about securing different areas of Salesforce or building in different areas of Salesforce. If you don't have a static analysis security testing tool integrated with your pipeline, I would recommend getting one. There's many out there. There's a Veracode, there is SonarQube. There's probably some more open source ones if cost is an obstacle. But get something to start analyzing the build that your developers are, you know, moving across your pipeline in many different environments. You should also implement a shared security framework between your Salesforce team and your IT teams. Establish regular user access reviews. You should have an understanding of all the different personas you have in your org and what exact permissions each of those users have for objects, for records, for system level permissions, what endpoints are they hitting. Having all of that documented and going over that with your security team. And then if you're running into any obstacles with your business stakeholders, your security team can be a great ally on helping the business understand why do you need extra time to do XYZ a certain way, or why do you need extra budget? Having that backing is a great partnership. You can then get additional funding to do stuff more correct. And again, consider utilizing signature success. If you want to have an easy one and you already pay for signature success, I'd highly recommend asking your CSM for their security digital engagement. It's very thorough. You'll be working on it for about a month or two with all the questions that they ask, but it doesn't cost anything extra as part of signature success. And then it'll allow you to establish some baseline KPIs that you can start to then measure and get to an ROI of your efforts.
Yep. And also, I just started a poll. It'd be awesome if everybody can answer it. Just trying to poll the audience, see who in your organization have public read write open or public read open for your account and contact objects. Because I think this is one thing I'd like, just have a quick talk as well about is, like you were saying, you don't get the access to record unless you need it for your business. But yeah, a lot of times they say, well, we trust our internal employees. We trust them, so we don't feel like they're going to steal any data.
I
But
don't.
why is that wrong? I know the answer, but I wanted to see what you have to say about that.
Are you waiting for the poll or are you directing
No,
it
no,
at me?
go ahead. And I mean, I'm just curious to see how
I've
many
been in
opened
so
up.
many companies now where I don't trust the end users using the org. I've seen a sales rep get upset over something happening with their manager, and they decide they want to scrape all of the contacts out of the org and then leave and then go to a competitor. I've seen salespeople upset about their commission, and then they do something similar where um, the commission objects wasn't locked down. So then they just go and change their commission, and then the company overpays them. I could keep going on about incidents, and it happens at every company. It varies in impact, but it's going to happen at some point. So I inherently do not trust users, and I will build them the access they need for their job, and I will take away everything else. They
Yep.
can't navigate to different apps in App Launcher. They can't add different tabs to their navigation bar. They are going to figure out a way. They cannot have access to these objects because there will be some users that will URL hack. Because how you access an account or a contact or a different object has a standard prefix. And eventually, if somebody just gives them a URL or if they want to try and figure it out, they could.
Yep. And I think the number one that I always also say about this is I'm thinking about the other side of it, that your users are your weakest link.
Yep.
So even if you trust your users, what happens once that user gets hacked? And that's what happened in all these data breaches, right? If the user has access to all of your accounts and contacts, so does the attacker that just attacked that user. Yet if your user has access to only, let's say, 5% or 10% of the contacts, the ones they need to see, then you only lost 5 or 10% of all of your contacts in your system, which is you're really containing that breach. Because right now we're at the poll, we're at 40%. We have about I think 58% people participate. I'd love to see if more people could get in on this poll, because I really would love understand the metric here. It's up 40% say yes. 60% are saying that it's not open, but actually my experience of seeing out there is more the other way around.
Yeah.
But actually, it's kind of nice to see with this audience, and maybe it's just because of the audience and the type of people we have here. Maybe that's why, and we're seeing a little bit different metrics, but usually it's flipped. It's more of most orgs I check and I validate have that public read write, or at least public read on for all their accounts and also their contacts,
And
usually.
fun fact, the account object, a lot of objects inherit sharing from the account, and one of those objects is contract. So if you use standard, CPQ or Revenue Cloud from Salesforce, if you have public read on your accounts, you are giving everyone access to every single contract that you're doing in Salesforce as well. So if you ever, if you're having difficulty getting buy-in to get it down to private, put back on the business. Do you accept every single employee that has access to Salesforce can see and download every single contract? I bet you'll get a different type of response when you tell them that.
Yep, exactly. And I'm gonna I also want to bring on a guest speaker here that joined the call. And I'm sorry, Nadina, but I want to call you out. So Nadina on the call here, she is also a Salesforce CTA, amazing person, super smart. And Nadina, if you don't mind, I'd love to hear your take on this. Like, I mean, is what Zach is saying, do you agree with everything? I mean, do you think anything that you wanted to add on the as far as what you're seeing out there yourself?
Hey Matt, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Zach is saying. Security is tricky because I think sometimes people inherently want to do good, but they do bad. So I am very much of the school that I trust, but I also verify. And so I've seen a lot where inherently people don't necessarily want to be bad actors, but they turn into bad actors. And in terms of, partnership with your security team, I'm definitely in that camp of it's an open conversation. It should be two-way. When I work with my security teams, I even teach them like, one day I'm not going to be here and you need to be able to lock me out if I have like high super admin access in that company or depending on the company I'm at. And it's always an interesting conversation because I think, again, security should always be top of mind, but it becomes top of mind when there's a reactive situation versus being proactive.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem is a lot of people, it's becomes this reactive thing. So do you have any tips for everyone, like the success that you've had with your security team, getting them engaged, like kind of like Zach has been doing himself?
Yeah, so for me, what I like to do, I like to start building that trust initially from day one, where it's more of here's where we are. I'm very honest. So when I go into an org and I assess it, I say it could be better, it could be worse. We're not the worst off in the industry, but how are you doing things? I know at previous companies I've worked at where security was top of mind. The security team wanted everything locked down. People weren't able to work efficiently. So one of the things we try to look at is making sure one, what is the work that user is doing? Two, any disparate systems, so systems like Salesloft, for example. I've seen issues in the past where security was not controlling that system. It was a business-owned system. And let's just say when salespeople left the company, they were turned off in Salesforce, but they still had access to Salesloft. I'll let people draw their own conclusions on, you know, people being, yeah, to use your expression, Matt, people being in the house and no one knew why. People were in that Salesloft system for quite some time because the business was controlling that system and no one had a good approach or a good way to say, well, what should we do? Should we do SSO? But it's going to take too long. So it's really about trying to understand, at least from like a system enterprise approach, who has access, who has ownership with those systems, making sure that they are also in the conversation. In this case, it wasn't just the security team, but the admins of each of those disparate systems, and start building trust. Help them to understand this is the worst case that we're preparing for. This is what a worst case scenario looks like. And this is why we need to have essentially these, I like to call them fire drills. If this were to happen today, do we know what to do? Do we know who to contact? Because sometimes that precious time can help secure the system faster, but oftentimes people are not thinking that far ahead.
Yep. Like who's your your emergency response team? What is your path to escalation, right?
Right. For
Yep.
both Salesforce and your internal company, because I'm just going to use Permageddon as an example.
Yeah.
I had two orgs at the time where people were, stressed out. They're like, Nadina, are we breached? And I'm like, one org has the new digital experience. So that org, when it comes back online, we need to check it. The other org, I'm like, we have nothing out, everything's outdated. So don't worry, we're not breached. But also, it kind of gives a conversation on we're so outdated that we're not breached. So that was a different conversation. But it's one of those things where as people were getting access to their orgs, they didn't have a checklist on what permissions need to be checked. Do we actually have a issue or not? Can we quickly diagnose what we should do next?
Yep. Very well said. Well said. Does anyone else want to, have any other comments you want to add to that? I know we also have some really nice security contributors on the call here. Anyone else that wants to, add to the conversation?
I see there was a question in the chat.
Yep,
or
that's
the
where I was
Q&A.
going next. So
How
I'll
is
key this up. So how is without sharing less secure is the question that we have in the chat there, or the Q&A.
Yes. So it tells the Apex code to run in system mode. You're basically ignoring all of the sharing rules and field level security and object level security that you have set for the user when the user, triggers that Apex class to execute. So anything in that Apex class is going to be running in a God mode, essentially allowing access to everything. When you start layering that on top of like a portal, it means, those portal users have access to everything.
Yep, and digital experiences and so forth. Exactly. So, Rachel, you want to talk about your comment you just put as well?
Hi, Matt. Hi, Matt.
Hey.
Yep, I was on a previous call and you had mentioned a query where you can check for users that can self-authorize. I did discover some. Thanks for letting me know how to find that. I think my question is now what? How do you fix that without breaking anything and breaking any impacts for the users?
You see that, Zach, the question?
Yep. So I've had to intentionally break stuff because up to a certain point in time, users could just install new connected apps by doing an OAuth authorize to their user because all users were, or certain apps were or permissions were set to all users may self-authorize. So I wouldn't necessarily be against breaking stuff. Now you can't go and break mission critical applications, but if you're running into a case of shadow IT, I would hit the block button on the manage OAuth usage inside of setup and force those users to come talk to the security teams. There is a level of analysis that has to be done. You have to identify the list of users that are accessing that OAuth usage for that connected application, and you have to define who is a permitted user for this. So
Yep.
beforehand, that level of effort wasn't really done by teams, and this was an often overlooked area. There is a high chance that you're going to upset someone, someone's going to be upset that you're taking away their cookie. But it's a needed job where you have to review everything that's connected to the org, because ultimately the Salesforce team is going to be responsible for when something goes wrong and start doing the work of analyzing what users actually need access to these items. There are various different SOQL queries you can do to see, like, how do I pull this event log file that tells me which users are accessing this endpoint or they're logging in as this service account? I don't have all of those off the top of my head. I did a month ago for reasons, but I could probably follow up and send it to you.
Yep.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Zach.
and I think part of it, what I was going to say, and for everyone, I just popped the resources since we're almost out of time. You got a QR code in my book, more Salesforce security resources, and the CRMT QR code if you want to get Zach's newsletter. But onto that, to expand on that question, kind of my guidance is more of look at that OAuth usage again, see how often are those applications being used, who's using it, so you can at least get that baseline. And then, if there's any question or any doubt, block the app
Mhm.
first, because I mean, what's worse is it's an app that someone is, is illegitimately gaining access to your org, and that's much worse than having some users come and complain to you. And,
Yep.
it's obviously if you can test it in your test, set up if you have Sandbox and test it kind of in your sandboxes, you can kind of check things out, test, if you possible. But if there is any doubt whatsoever, it's like I said, much better to create some friction in your users than having a big data breach in your company. And I think that's kind of where I say, but start with just seeing who's accessing it, how frequently, and then you kind of can go from there.
Yep, and give your executives a heads up you're doing that. That'll help give you air cover for when, those end users go to their manager or their senior leader saying, Zach is removing my access to this application that, they never talked to us about. So give them a heads up that based on, the recent guidance from Salesforce, there is an area where we have an opportunity for improvement, and you're removing stuff that has not gone through a risk review with your cyber risk, legal teams, whatever, and then block the access accordingly.
Yep, exactly. And I think everyone on call, if you have not already, go through all your connected apps today. I mean, the
Yep.
Salesforce is blocking net new users from accessing these apps that haven't been installed, but anything that exists today is still active. So if you have not done that, do that right now, because you could have an app in there that you don't know and that people are accessing your data. And if you don't know how to do that, just DM me. I'm happy to get on a call, walk you through that. And I know we're just about out of time here. We can, as always, we can stay on a little bit later if there's any other questions people want to have a discussion, because that's what this is really for. One thing I did want to do the Superman thing here is new T-shirt. Only you can prevent and contain data breaches in Salesforce. So anyone wants the new T-shirt, first 5 people DM me on LinkedIn. I'll send you a T-shirt, and maybe you might get a book, one of those people. Outside of that, the floor is now open for any questions that anyone wants to talk about. So if there's any others, I see a lot of people on here that kind of normally talk, but if everyone's quiet, we can always close up the call. But I'd love it if we had some discussion about this topic. And actually, one question I just have for the audience is, how many of you feel like your security team is actually properly engaged and asking the right questions in your organization here? Does anyone, have anything on that? Do you feel like you're getting the right support you need from your team? Everyone's very quiet today.
I've scared everyone.
I think so. I think so. It should be like a classroom. We start calling on people, but I won't do that. So, all right, if nobody wants to speak up, we can close this out. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time today. Look forward next week, couple weeks. We'll have our next session. I believe it's already on the website. Thanks. Appreciate
Thank you
your
for having
time,
me.
Zach.
Thanks
Yep.
for having me.
All right.